Hello and welcome to today's episode on basic principles of translation. The content for this episode has been researched by Sunil Saxena, who is an author and journalist with over 3 decades of experience in print, new media, social media, media education, and media research. In this episode, you will learn about the basic principles of translation, especially the points that must be kept in mind while translating news reports. You will be told about the different kinds of translation and the skills that the good translators must possess. You will also learn how journalists working in 2 languages in a multi-language country like India translate news content. You will be apprised of the problems that news desks face in translating news reports from source language, that is language in which the statement has been made, to target language, that is language in which the newspaper is published. You will also be told as to how news desks overcome these challenges. Skills of a translator. Let's start with the definition of translation. Translation can be defined as the rendering of text from one language into another. To be a good translator, an individual should possess 3 key skills. The first is an understanding of source language, that is a language from which the translation is to be done. The second is a knowledge of target language, that is a language in which the text is to be translated. The third is in-depth knowledge of subject matter. For instance, a translator who has no knowledge or understanding of physics cannot translate any seminal work in physics. There are 2 kinds of translators. The first one is translators who are employed by governments or companies. They are called technical translators. The second kind of translators comprises those who work for publishing houses or translate texts as freelancers. They are called literary translators. There is no strict definition of translators when it comes to news. In fact, media organizations do not hire translators. They hire reporters or editors who can work in 2 languages. For instance, a Hindi newspaper will hire reporters or editors who are very proficient in Hindi because this is going to be the source language in which they will produce content. However, the same reporters will be meeting news sources who may communicate information in English. It is for the reporters to take notes in English and translate them in Hindi when writing the report. The reporters also face one more challenge. The press notes issued by the government organizations are either in Hindi or in regional languages. The reporters must know the source language if they have to work in Indian newspapers. The work of the news desks is even more difficult. In several vernacular newspapers, the bulk of news copy is sourced in English from news agencies. Editors are required to translate this news copy quickly without changing context or meaning of the news report. Often the news copy, especially if it is comment or analysis or technology stories, may use technical terms that may not have easy or ready equivalents in the target language. The editors have to make sure that they translate such reports in language that is easily understood by their readers. Types of translations. There are three types of translations. They range from literal to idiomatic and depend upon the purpose of translation as well as the needs of the target audience for whom the translation is being done. The result is three different theories or styles of translation that have emerged over the centuries. The first is literal translation. These are word-for-word translations and use the grammatical structure and lexical form of the source language. The first important practitioner of this theory was Pliny the Younger. He introduced the style of translating words from Greek to Latin and vice versa using the word-for-word approach. This theory is adopted for translations of sacred and authoritative texts where it is essential not to change the meaning of any word. The second is idiomatic translation. These are thought-for-thought translations and seek to closely communicate the meaning of the source text in the target text. This theory of translation can be traced back to Marcus Cicero, Roman statesman, orator, and writer who lived in the 1st century BC. He translated many Greek works into Latin using the sense for sense approach. He was against word-for-word approach because such translation to him sounded strange. The third kind of translation is known as unduly free or free translation. Such translations add to the source text. They paraphrase or even change information and are more commonly done in newsrooms. This style of translation is popular among journalists. They not only translate news reports from source language into target language, but also amplify meanings. At times, journalists may give a new spin to content given in a press note. This is why translation by journalists cannot be called literary or idiomatic translations. Another interesting theory of translation is the one that was put forth by John Dryden, a 17th century poet and translator. According to Dryden, translations can be of three kinds: metaphrase, which is word by word and line by line translation; paraphrase, which is sense for sense translation; and imitation, which involves a variance from words and sense. Interestingly, the third theory was also endorsed by another 17th century poet and translator, Abraham Cowley, who also advocated freedom in translation. He derided the word-for-word translation as one madman translating another. The poets have always been wary of translations. Their biggest fear is that the essence of their thoughts is lost when their poem is translated in another language. The legendary poet Robert Frost best expressed this when he said, "Poetry is what is lost in translation." Basic principles of translation. Different principles have been advanced by different translators over the ages, but the most commonly accepted principles of translation are the following. 1. The translator must have a good understanding of the language in which the text is written. 2. The translator should have an excellent knowledge of the language in which the text is to be translated. Ideally, it should be the mother tongue of the translator. 3. The translator should have the maturity and experience to understand the content and intention of the author whose work is to be translated. Fourth, the translator, unless specifically required, should avoid a word-to-word translation. This kills the free flow of thought and curbs the spirit and beauty of expression. The soul of the original work is lost. 5. The translator should use words and forms of speech that are easily understood. 6th, the translator should try to create an overall effect that is similar to the tone and tenor of the original work. These are difficult objectives to achieve. A good translator, according to these principles, should be able to translate a document in such a way that the accuracy and meaning of the source text is preserved. The writing style is similar to the one used by the author in the source text, and the translated text is fully understandable to the target audience. Finally, the translator must remember that his job is not to become the author himself. As the famous English essayist Samuel Johnson noted, "Our translator is to be like his author. It is not his business to excel him." How to translate news copy? The journalists are expected to follow the general principles of translation when translating news copy from one language into another. Their big advantage is that they have the liberty of using the free form of translation. They can add commentary and translate the news report in a manner that is easier for the readers to understand. Good journalists read the news reports from the beginning to the end to get a sense of the story. They frequently refer to the dictionary or to their senior colleagues to learn the meaning of unknown words. They are especially particular about context. They realize that a good translation must capture the essence of what the writer wants to communicate. It is only when they have understood the report in its entirety that they start the translation work. This is a good practice, and news desks encourage newcomers to follow it. News desks also insist that editors should go over the translated text carefully to make sure that they have not changed meaning. If need be, they are encouraged to find new words that express the thought better. Finally, they are required to compare the translated copy with the original to ensure that the spirit and context of the original has not been altered. The editors also can't get away with dead or boring translations. They have to ensure that the translated copy is full of verve and vigor, and their readers enjoy reading the day's newspaper. This is not an easy task, given the fact that the editors have to translate copy quickly. They do not have the luxury to sit back and review their work the next day. The translated report has to be published the same day. Indian language newspapers therefore insist that their news desks should comprise of editors who not only have good news sense but should also be highly skilled translators. Common translation problems. It is possible that the original copy has words for which there are no ready equivalents in the target language. One such commonly used word is computer. This is an English word, but most Indians are familiar with it and use it freely in their own languages. News desks therefore advise newcomers to retain such words in the translated text instead of using literal translations of well-known foreign words. A golden rule of translation is that the translator is translating meanings and not words. If there is no equivalent of a foreign word in target language, then the foreign word should be used as it is. However, there may be situations when a foreign word from a foreign language is used for the first time. For example, glasnost was used for the first time in news reports in the late 1980s when the then USSR began to break up. Glasnost was a Russian word, and very few Indians were familiar with its meaning. The translator needed to explain the word glasnost for the readers. Later, with frequent use, the word glasnost became a part of Indian language news vocabulary and could be used without explanation. The foreign words are not the only issues that the translators have to grapple with. Usage is another. Words may have different meanings based on context. For example, the word skip means to move forward with light, alternate hops on each foot. But this is not the only meaning. Skip also means to leave something out, or to go away hastily or secretly. The translator has to see the usage to arrive at the correct meaning. For this, he needs to have a good knowledge of the source language. The idioms can be particularly confusing. The same is true of slang. It may take time for the translator to familiarize himself with idioms or slang used in the source language, but he has no option. The quality of translation depends on how good is the translator's understanding of the source language. Another important issue is the writing style. How do you achieve the same elegance in the target language? It is quite possible that the position of verbs in the target language may be different to the position of verbs in the source language. This is where the translator need not translate word for word, but should translate thought for thought. The goal in news translation should not be to do literal translation. It should be to elegantly convey the basic thought in the target language without changing context. The translator should not be worried about the length of the translated sentence. It is quite possible that the translator may need to use more words in the target language as compared to the source language. This is quite acceptable in news translation. Often, the news translator has to struggle with quotes. A speaker may make a striking statement in the source language which may be based on a play of words. Speakers of that language will understand what the speaker implies. For the translator, it is a nightmare. It is not easy to capture the nuances of direct speech. The editor is encouraged to use the direct speech phonetically and explain the meaning in brackets. Another thorny issue relates to the names of organizations or their popular acronyms. For instance, should UNESCO or UNICEF be used in Hindi or Tamil as an English abbreviation? Should it be used phonetically, or should there be a Hindi equivalent? For instance, United Nations has a Hindi equivalent, Sanyukt Rashtra. But what about UN? The thumb rule adopted by news desks, by and large, is to retain the names used in source language. The exceptions are the names that are officially recognized in the target language. For instance, it is perfectly fine to use Vanijya Mantralaya in Hindi and Ministry of Commerce in English. But it does not make sense to translate the word Bhavan in the name Rabindra Bhavan in English. The translator will change the meaning if he does so. Another difficulty that newsmen face in a country like India is that they may interview a person in one language but write the news report in another language. For instance, a reporter working for an English language newspaper may interview a source in Hindi because the source does not know English. However, when writing the news report, the points made by the source have to be stated in English. So what should the reporter do? Should the reporter make notes in the source language or in the target language? Newspapers advise all reporters to take notes in the source language. This way, the reporter will not miss out the finer nuances of the language. But if the reporter interviews a source in Hindi and makes notes in English, the chances are that he may not capture the finer points being made by the source. This is because he has to perform three tasks simultaneously. 1. Ask questions. 2. Understand answers in the source language. And 3. Translate answers in the target language. Each language uses linking words, and many of these may have distinct meanings. For instance, since is used in a different context as compared to because. The same is true of though and although. The translator has to find suitable linking words in the target language to convey the same meaning. To ensure consistency, good news desks build translation style guides. They note down the translations of commonly used foreign words, organizations, phrases, idioms, etc. The editors refer to the translation style guide whenever they are in doubt. It saves time and ensures consistency. The importance of translation cannot be overstressed. It is the best way to share information, be it from one civilization to another or from one culture to another. This is why the Romans translated Greek texts way back in the 1st century BC. Even today, important texts are translated from one language to another. They are important for trade, diplomacy, scholarship, and news dissemination. A quick summary of what you have learned today. Today you learned that translation is the process of changing text from one language into another. It is best done by individuals who possess three skills. The first is an understanding of the source language, that is, the language whose text is to be translated. The second is a proficiency in the language in which the text is to be translated. And the third is a good knowledge of the subject matter or content that is to be translated. Based on the kind of work they do, the translators can be divided into two categories. The translators who are employed by companies or governments to translate documents are called technical translators, while the translators who are employed by publishers to translate books are called literary translators. There are three important requirements of translation. These are: the translator must preserve the accuracy and meaning of the source document. The writing style should be the same as that used by the author in the source text, and the translated text should be easily understood by the readers for whose benefit the translation has been done. There are three different theories or styles of translation that have been advocated by translators over the centuries. The first is literal translation. In this style, the translators make a word-to-word or line-to-line translation. They also do not change the grammatical structure. Generally, this style of translation is used to change sacred or religious texts. The second theory is the thought-for-thought or sense-for-sense translation. In this case, the translator is not rigid in his work, but maintains the spirit, style, and accuracy of the text while translating from the source language to the target language. The third theory is that of unduly free or free translation. In this case, the translator can add information or commentary while translating the text. However, while doing so, he has to ensure that the accuracy and meaning of the text remains the same. News desks follow the theory of free translation while translating news reports from source language to target language. They summarize or provide the most important points of the story in the translated text. Sometimes they may even add commentary to assist the reader better understand the meaning of the report. The news desks also use simple, everyday words in communicating meaning. They are especially careful when it comes to translating direct speech or quotes from the source language to the target language. This is all that we have in today's episode. We hope that it helped you understand what is translation, what are the skills that a translator should have, what are the different theories of translation, and how news desks in a multi-language country like India translate news copy. Thank you, and see you soon with another informative episode. Goodbye.